Okay, so I think we're ready to go. So hello everybody, welcome to the TST meeting. And today we're going to discuss, well, first of all, David's going to present, and then afterwards we're going to discuss the proposal for augmenting our code review process and hopefully increasing the bandwidth for managing our code reviews. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you, David.
Great. Well, thank you. And before we get to that, I did want to offer out one thing that I think might be a nice addition to this meeting, to set up, just to bake it into the process, to set up some time for community recognition up front each time we meet. And the way that would look is I found on the wiki this old community acknowledgements page where it looked like December last year there was kind of a shout out that was given, and going forward, we could do the same sort of thing, and I put an example there. I'd like to give a shout out today to Andrea, who wrote up a post about what he's working on, which I thought was a nice way to advertise what's happening in the community and to let people know what some contribution opportunities are. So thank you to Andrea for that. And I think just going forward, baking in acknowledgments is a nice way for all us to keep top of mind that there is a community out there, and that recognition of great work that people are doing is a key part of keeping that community healthy and effective. And so going forward, if people want to come to this meeting with just some shout outs to offer, I think that would be a nice way to just kick it off and make sure we're all keeping recognition as something we're thinking of throughout the week. So if that seems reasonable, we can just keep that like a standing item.
I definitely like it.
Great. So with that, are there any other, I know this is kind of spur of the moment, does anybody want to give a shout out to anybody in the community that you can think of?
Yeah.
Okay, well, think about it for next week then.
Yep.
Great. So for today, let me present. As Thomas said, we wanted to get your thoughts on a proposal for increasing ONOS code reviewers. And as a starting point, this is my third week here, and I've had a number of conversations with you, and if I haven't had a chance to speak with you yet, feel free to grab me, and I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. But one of the things that I've heard as a theme in those initial conversations is it seems like people are feeling overwhelmed, like that's a key word that has come up. So I offer this quote. I love this quote. It was something I came back to a lot when I was at Mozilla. This is a quote from the founder of Mozilla when she would periodically talk to new employees and share some ideas about what it was like to work there. And there's two things I like about this quote. One is it frames being overwhelmed in a positive way. And she says that for an open source project, being overwhelmed is a sign of success. People are excited about what you're doing, and they're so excited that they're showing up at your door and wanting to help out and wanting to ask you questions. And there's a lot of activity going on. So I think it's very helpful to view being overwhelmed in a positive light. And then secondly, she offered some thoughts about what do you do when you feel overwhelmed. And again, I won't read the whole quote, it's up on the board, but the key takeaway here is what to do when you're feeling overwhelmed is to pass on what you know how to do and to empower other people to do those things. So with that in mind, that was what framed the approach to what do we do about the code review challenges that we have, and what do we do about feeling overwhelmed in terms of code review. And it seems like the two challenges are that it's very hard to get reviewer status because people have to get command over the entire code base, and that code base is getting bigger and bigger over time, so that bar goes higher and higher over time. And then two, we want to maintain the quality of the code base, that's obvious, but I think we have set a bar for the entire code base where there are pockets in the code where that bar doesn't need to be as high. So I think we're making the hurdle for becoming a reviewer high, and then the hurdle for getting code into getting new code into the repository higher than it needs to be in some cases. So those are some challenges. So what can we do to bring in help? We can address this situation by finding ways to increase the number of community members who are able to do those reviews that we want, and then setting appropriate thresholds for different parts of the code. And we'll go into what that means exactly here on this proposed changes page. And a note before we go into the details, this is not anything that we've just kind of created out of thin air. We've looked at what some of the best practices are in other open source communities and modeled this proposed set of changes on that. So what we're suggesting is to not look at the code base holistically, but to look at it in terms of a series of modules and submodules in the code base. And then establish criteria for how people can demonstrate mastery over just those modules or submodules instead of the entire repository. And then we can identify an initial set of people who already have mastery over those modules today. And it sounds like there are cases where people do have that mastery but haven't been recognized yet. And then going forward, we can create a nomination process so people can own new modules or submodules in the future. And then once we have this in place, we would just need a way to establish a process for measuring the activity to make sure that each module or submodule is healthy and is evolving in a way that we would like. And I'm going through this quickly because I know that we have discussion afterwards, but please feel free to stop me at any point if you have questions during this. And on the previous slide, it offered some new terminology in terms of owner and other things, so I just wanted to set expectations or be clear about what we're offering in terms of what these terms are when we're going through this proposal. So just really quickly, a contributor in this terminology is everyone who has signed a CLA and can contribute a patch set and push code for review. Reviewer, everyone can review any patch set. And then in particular, we're talking about this new owner terminology. There's two different types of owner. One, a module owner, which is someone who can give a +2 review for a part of the code base and submit code in that area. And then compare that with a project owner, which is the same thing, someone who can give a +2 review, but that's for the code base at large, the entire repository.
And so to be clear, we already have contributors, reviewers, and project owners today. What the proposal would be is to introduce just the module owner.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. And there are some responsibilities and consequences with going to be an owner in this sense. Owners would be responsible for maintaining the quality of contributions for that part of the code base. And if those responsibilities are not met, you can have a consequence initially of receiving a warning that, you know, this is something we've noticed and we would like you to address it. And then if that's not addressed, people can lose ownership status with this proposal.
By not performing the responsibilities, that means not performing them at all and not performing them adequately?
Yes.
But, you know, it to be clear, blocking, you know, code should be getting reviewed, but blocking code that's not up to par is doing the work.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I get it. It's just it wasn't clear as to.
Yes, yes.
Yes, you're right. A lot of the details here are not provided in this, but yes, we can sort that out. And sorting out those details is what this initial pilot phase is about. You know, we have this initial idea of what this would look like, but before we roll it out everywhere, we think it makes sense to do it on a smaller scale. So the idea of the pilot is we propose to roll this out with an initial group of reviewers who are located physically near us here, so that we can have some one-on-one interactions with people to make sure that the process makes sense and people are understanding what's expected of them and that people can be successful. You know, we want to set up a situation where we're getting our needs met and the people who are stepping up to be owners are also being able to be successful as well. So a win-win situation. So trying that out in a real world. So we're now saying that nominations for this pilot are open. If you have suggestions for people who meet this criteria of being physically close to here who could be an owner, please post it to the TST mailing list. And then going forward, this is not blocking this pilot, but before we roll this out widely, we want to create a Garrett plugin to enable us to get relevant information about how each of the modules are doing. And once that pilot is done and the plugin is available, we're suggesting that we finish the pilot phase and open this up across the board.
People can nominate themselves, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you interested?
And those sorts of details we'll, of course, document on the wiki about how nominations work and, you know, provide a lot of clear information.
Yeah, and I think to answer your question, Bill, in sort of this pilot part, it makes sense that, you know, the nominations are going to be fairly informal, and our review of them is going to be, you know, probably, you know, we know the people well and stuff like that because they're physically located here. The goal eventually would be to have some more well-defined process where, an existing owner would work with someone to sort of show, here's some areas of the code that this person's worked on, or here's some reviews or areas in which they've helped, and sort of put together the nomination in a way that isn't just like here's a person's name, but rather like here's why this person deserves the role.
Yeah, we can provide some good examples of what a nomination would look like.
One question. So if we're going to be introducing some module owner kind of stuff, so we are going to be developing some kind of plugin for it. How about who reviews what kind of stuff? Like we use Blame plugin right now, but are we going to change that process? I mean,
I think the Git blame is largely different. Git blame assigns reviewers.
right, yeah, but are we going to change that process? I mean, it can be pretty much random people get some best reviews from random plugins, so are we going to change that? I mean, if it's a module owner, it will always be added to the reviewers, those kind of stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a good question. We haven't discussed it. The thought was that we would start with just leaving the use of that blame plugin as is. But it's not a bad idea to potentially consider providing some correlation between who the authorities are and who should be the reviewers. But I also at the same time want to make sure that we don't conflate the term, the module owner with the reviewers, because anybody should be able to comment on any code. It's just not everybody will be able to slam the code in to the master.
So the other thing is we have another plugin in place, the Get Reviewers plugin, where we can probably tie in the information about the module owners to make sure that a module owner is automatically put on reviews that are relevant to their modules.
Yeah, and that's the correlation I was talking about. Yep.
Great. And to wrap up the presentation and move on to more of a discussion, what we're looking for in terms of a healthy, successful pilot and a healthy, successful program bringing in more code reviewers are the items here. We want to increase the throughput of accepted reviews, decrease the amount of time it takes to complete a code review. I think there's a diversity angle here as well, and increase the number of people who are not ON Labs staffers who are doing code review. Currently, just 1 out of 9 people are not staffers. And then lastly, and I know this is subjective, but make sure that the project quality is either maintained or improved through this process. It's about quality, not quantity.
Yeah.
And that's it for the presentation. So thoughts, feedback, suggestions?
Can you go to the previous slide?
Sure.
I saw the pilot.
The pilot one?
Yes. So I think the near the ON Labs office, I have concerns about this.
Okay.
How is the team development team is major is in the India and China. So how do you handle that? How do you grow the teams over there? And
This is initial pilot. This is just an initial pilot. So that we can eventually the idea is to not to restrict that.
So once this process goes well, then we can add more people.
So this would be time boxed.
Shows the mission as one. So what's the initial? How do you define this?
This
initial.
So when rolling this, it has nothing to do with the submissions. It has to do with this mode of operation. We're going to try out this mode of operation on a local and limited basis until we iron out all of the kinks and problems, and then we're going to open it up to basically that any potentially contributors and the reviewers who provide quality code and quality contributions and quality reviews can earn their nominations. So it can be anybody. After a while, initially it would be we put a stipulation on there that it should be somebody who's local so that we can have more of a dialogue in the beginning.
It's just an easier metric. It's just simpler because we already know the people around here, so we know what everyone's capable of. But once we have the formula going, we can kind of just extend it out to people who aren't local to us.
Isn't it the major problem today is that how to get involved people from a little bit farther away from ON Lab?
There's two problems. There's one problem is we have an avalanche of reviews coming in, and we have no clear way to delegate these reviews to separate people. And the other problem is, of course, getting people from the community. And this, the way I understand it, is first address how we delegate the reviews to people. So as a first phase, get that process ironed out, and then as time goes on, onboard people from outside. And by advertising this process, people in the community who are good reviewers will hopefully present themselves and start reviewing, and we'll have a process for nomination.
I'm just wondering if there's a good reviewer we already know from the outside.
Sure.
Maybe engaging them, it's a good pilot run to understand, what
I think
is
like
involved.
step 2 though, we should just take incremental steps, and I think what was proposed is.
That's
okay.
I think that's a valid concern, though. We don't want to turn people away. Maybe we just need to be clear that we're time boxing this to a short. Maybe if we are clear that this is a pilot.
Exactly. I mean, we can talk about what everybody has in mind for the time frame for this pilot. My thought was that
Not
something
long.
that we run probably like for a month at most, 2.
Yeah.
Most.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, probably even within a month, we should be able to have enough data and finalize the kinks in a process with the plugin and everything else. And also should provide enough time to be able to put together, guidelines for nominations, and also a set of rules for potentially, revoking these privileges. It would be good to have that fairly clear in the name of clear communication.
Do we have metrics for metrics by which we would nominate someone before the process of nomination? But we have metrics that would qualify someone to be nominated.
That's what we would need to put together before we open it up, right?
But yes.
And we had talked about that. I mean, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, we had initially started down that way, trying to quantify it and say, like, if you have this many points or what have you, but we thought there'd be too many concerns around gaming. And then again, when we looked at best practices from other communities, I'm most familiar with how Mozilla did it, but they didn't try to quantify it. It was more, a web of trust method. Like if another module owner recommended you that, there was some weight associated to that and it was worth considering, and then there was more of a discussion around it, not like this person has done X, Y, Z, therefore he's automatically, or she's automatically.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Yeah, so Ali, one of the things we could try doing is we could have a number of, we could look at the number of commits and the number of reviews that someone is doing in a particular area as sort of a filtering function, but the problem is that if it's the only criteria, then it's easy to have some small commits, and it's easy to just have bogus reviews.
Absolutely, I'm not saying that would be the only metric. I'm just wondering whether we have any metric.
Yeah,
I
we
think
don't
it could be
right
a
now.
combination, right? I mean, someone who has done a minimum of say 10, 15 reviews, others can look at the quality of the reviews or the quality of the submissions, and then make a call on
Yeah, and it has to be both. It's
Yeah.
key that it's both code and the reviews themselves.
Exactly.
Because
Or we'd even talked about it being wider than that, like documentation. If you've proved that you really know the code by documenting it really well, maybe you're qualified to do the review, even if you're not necessarily a coder. It's possible.
That's true too.
So I still have the concerns about this. First of all, I want to fully understand about this one. So how do you define the phase? Is the time based or is the date based? How long?
How long do you find the one?
The phase. You're right.
Phase.
This is unclear about that. You're right. We should be a lot more clear. I mean, Thomas, I know what is your thought?
my thought was 6 weeks max.
6 weeks.
6 weeks
How
maximum.
about finishing up EMU with this pilot, and then
That's about lines up, doesn't it?
Okay.
Does that address?
Just in response to the people's comments about the near, why we near. Okay, I was thinking the programming language is a global language. Everybody know about that. It's no communication issues when we show the code, right? Logic, coding styles, is period. So I don't think the distance is the matter. The matter is as the people point out, we need to find the qualified reviewer. I agree with that, but the use the near seems like was trying to divide or.
Well, so one particular reason for the pilot why we chose local was to avoid time spans. We didn't want somebody to be on the other side of the world where it basically takes a day to be able to to get feedback across. And in this initial phase, we were expecting that there would be more of a guidance and mentorship and ability to provide more frequent feedback. And with the time zones difference being in place, that would make it more difficult. That's purely just for practical purposes. Clearly, that will evaporate once the initial pilot phase is done.
Okay, sounds good to me. It's probably it's a trial, right? It's in a very early stage we need a trial. But personally, I was thinking with any process we set here to encourage to grow the community.
Yes.
Instead of right, it's not just okay.
Well, that's the whole goal. That's the whole goal of. That's the whole goal of this, right?
Okay. Mixing up correlation and causation is just that people we are familiar with, and the convenience factors just end up being correlated with distance.
So the Chinese things the first time once you know each other, so you familiar each other in the future. So that you'll never talk, you'll never know. I don't believe that is the excuse.
No, Patrick, the reason for nearness here is more because we don't have a technical means to enforce the ownership right now. We're working on putting those things in place. We also don't have a formal process, and so it's important that we have like the ability to clearly communicate very quickly with people when there are issues or problems with the process that we've put together. And so as Thomas was saying, with someone halfway across the world, if it takes us 2 days to sort out some issue that they're having, there could sort of be confusion that's created. Whereas if it's someone who's local, we can sort of have a face-to-face meeting if they're having a problem or they're confused or don't understand. So the goal is eventually to iron out both the technical side and the process side to get to a point where we can open this up to anyone in the world who wants to participate.
Sure. Brian, I fully understand about this. So I have no questions about what you said. From the process perspective, I agree with this. For any new things, we need practice first, then also expand.
Yeah.
So there is no question about this. I was just in response to see, it's the people's easy to get, easy to talk. That is the excuse to set up these rules. I don't think that that is not what I'm thinking. No. Okay.
So would a sort of reviewer tutorial, something to that extent, be helpful? Like where we could gather people who are interested in reviewing code, so that could be developers, other people, whoever, who would be interested in reviewing code. It would also force us to formalize our process by which we do code reviews. And then just like we do developer tutorials, we can always identify out of a pack of people a good developer. We might be able to identify a good reviewer. I don't know, it's just an idea. It might be a silly one, but
yeah, I agree. Yeah, the more support we can put around this, the better, I think.
Yeah, because we have this high bar of code quality, right? And if we can, as much as possible, try to align potential reviewers to that high bar, maybe not exactly to the high bar, but kind of like guide them towards it, and identify good reviewers. I don't know, maybe it's...
There's a quick question I have with that is, how is that different than documenting well what we expect of the code submissions?
No, agreed. I'm not... So yes, you can... There's one phase where you document it, right? But if you observe people in action, right? It's kind of like when we do developer tutorials, we have good documentation for our tutorials, but then when you see people doing the tutorial, you identify people who do things in a crazy way, or aren't really grasping the notions well, versus other people who are like, just picking up like this, right? And so I don't know. I've never done this for reviewing.
Yeah, neither have I. Which is why I'm not opposed to it. I'm just simply asking what you envision would be the payload of the training, or how you would run it. I guess I couldn't imagine.
Yeah, so that's. I mean, I could imagine scenarios where we take sample applications that we have, and feed them back into Carrot, and get people to code review those, and kind of based on the guidelines we have. I mean, this is just off the top of my head, so I haven't really thought about this, but and see how they code review versus how we would have code reviewed. Maybe they have different ideas, but they end up with similar results, and we deem if they come close to us, like if their code review is of similar quality to ours, we deem this a successful code review, a good code review, and then we can pick out people from that population as already people who at least seem to be better.
Mhm.
And it would fix the problem where we actually have interaction with these people. Right? We have a proper interaction with these people and get to know them, right?
Yeah, and clearly also okay, that's a good point. One of the criteria that we probably ought to put on there would be some level of familiarity with Gary process, overall Gary, just generic Gary, right? So that you know what to do, for example, when you see a merge conflict or rebasing is required and things like that.
So there's familiarity with code and familiarity with tools.
Yes.
Actually, the one more thing that I want to add in
Sure.
here. So for any new process, basically the trial, like this process, you want to trial and make sure you're potentially find the issues, you solve the issues in the front, right? So in order to solve this and get the practice well, so the geographically distributed development architectures and the infrastructure is very common in the futures, right? So if we trial this later, now probably we can trial in the early stage, because if you don't trial, you never know the problem.
Sure.
Right? So what I suggest here is for that initial pilot, even we understand have communication concerns, issues, or the time zone difference, but we still need to add a few more people from the different time zones to join these teams to figure out, hey, any problems, right? At least we know in the early stage, we can fix it in the future.
Sure, I hear what you're saying. I mean, we would be limiting the ways we're ironing out the bugs if we strict.
Yeah, it's my thought and
I'm going to hear that, and there's all sorts of different ways we could, arrange a pilot phase. Personally, I think the more important thing is to keep it short. I mean, we could have, there's probably a dozen different ways you could have a pilot, but as long as it's short, it almost doesn't really matter how we do it. The end goal is getting to the expanded state quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't personally have a strong opinion.
And I would prefer to do something now, even if it's informal and it's limited, than do nothing until it's all perfect. And so, I would prefer if you stick with this particular plan and just keep the plan, keep it short, and then afterwards we would open it up. And I don't think we can deal with all of the problems. Yeah. That's part of the pilot, is right to work out some kinks, not necessarily all kinks.
And this doesn't need to block nominations or thinking about nominations for the expanded phase either.
Exactly. Yeah.
And how do you evaluate once a person becomes a module owner? Because that's another level. So you need somebody to evaluate the module owners and the code they submit. How you propose to do that?
So this is where the hierarchy comes in. I mean, I think ultimately, everything rolls up to the technical steering team. The project owner, as it were, owns all the modules underneath, and they can make a decision about what's well owned or not well owned. If that's
No, that's exactly what I was envisioning.
Does that answer the question?
Yes. Isn't that a burden for the project owners that they have to do both? Maybe they're module owners for something, and they have to do the review of the review. Isn't that too much?
Of course. I mean, well, that's what we do today now, right? So there will be, for example, we expect that there might be code submissions that span multiple sort of code areas, which do not fall squarely within authorized list of a particular module owner. In that case, the review, they can certainly, the different module owners can certainly give their plus ones and minus ones and those things. But then we would have to step up the overall project owners would have to come in and provide the final review. And then, the thing is, this is not going to be static. This is going to be highly dynamic, in a sense that we expect it to evolve in some reasonably stable way, where the boundaries will shift gradually as people will step up, join the team, prove themselves, or as they gain maturity or experience. I would expect. That's why we want to make sure that our Gary plugin is really easily managed and easily configurable, and doesn't necessarily align with the modules themselves. Instead it's going to be partitioned based on package, pretty much like package namespace. and then module namespace.
Actually for this one, so I think I share some opinion with Thomas before. So it's tough for the code reviews basically is doing the two type of things. The number one is your coding styles, follow the rules or all those things. For this particular modules for the project, basically you need the deep knowledge to understand the service, right? That is the case. So whenever things are happening in the futures, or some guys modify your code, you understand the interactions with the others, right? It's the case. It's the things you should focus on. So for such kind of things, I hope when you divided the project owners, the module owners, all those things, I think the module owner probably need to expand that ones to cover both. Like for example, the topology, the subsystems, you should cover the link subsystems, the node subsystems, everything, right? Because all these are related things. So that you can just not just assign a single guys to the single modules. So for the service levels, like the BGPs or the BGP RS, the southbound the OVSDBs, all those things. So sometimes when you modify those code, you need to understand the impact on the others, or the impact the service logic. So I think when you consider these ones, probably you need to think about the both level, okay?
And it doesn't mean that each area of the code will have just one owner. It's the mapping is actually the other way. It's the contributor will have a list of areas where they have the authority to do +2 and submit, and so there can be overlaps. And I expect there will be overlaps.
Yes. Actually, the overlap model is better.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good feedback. Thank you. Because things are interdependent.
Oh yeah, of course. So the more the modules you know, the more quality and the feedback you can give.
I mean, that is how people sort of become better at this process, right? By demonstrating a good understanding of the overall system and how these things fit together. Right? Because there are multiple aspects to code reviews. One is purely syntactic, stylistic review. The one which is, in my opinion, more harder is sort of evaluating the semantic correctness or evaluating the abstractions and the cleanness of those things, right? And usually, typically, I mean, the best thing changes, the change that the pure lines of code that you write to achieve something, because the more lines of code is actually probably liability.
Especially for the store.
So if you have maybe you realize that in the process you see that there is an abstraction that is missing, and you can propose adding an abstraction. That is one way to show that you have a better grasp of how these things fit together and how others can build on top of what you are writing.
So would with what Majan's saying, would the module owner be responsible for also tracking proposals? So we have this kind of loose, informal way of getting a proposal from the community, discussing the proposal, encouraging them to build interfaces first, publish the interfaces, and then we review that, and then they do implementation. Would the module owner take that responsibility as well?
I guess I wasn't envisioning that we would correlate those two efforts. So there would be some one, but I wasn't thinking we would tie those two together right now. I would still think that the project proposals would be just funneled through TST as business as usual. And the code, once the code starts coming, then that's where either the TST, the product owners or the module owners will be able to step up. But in theory, there's no module owners for brand new code, right? It's just product owners, because the person who's just submitting the code hasn't really earned the.
Well, it depends where you're submitting the code into, right?
Sure. If it's revisions to the existing stuff.
Well, not even. It might be a new distributed primitive, right? And that might fall, on Madan, for example, right? But the point is that as the code base gets larger and larger and larger, I think we'll find ourselves in the same situation where more and more proposals will come along.
Yeah, for sure.
And we can't keep track of those either.
Yes. So I don't disagree at all. My thought was that we would just keep this isolated to the code review process and not sort of keep it simpler that way. And then I think as we gonna approach the doorsteps of that other problem that you described, then we would deal with it then. I don't want to over engineer this or tie it together with too many other things.
And I don't see like sort of things getting added to the core at the same rate as applications getting added to,
for sure.
like, the larger
we actually
ecosystem.
want to encourage the opposite.
Exactly. Right. I mean, there might be times where like enough applications see something that is missing in the core, and they can we can consider a proposal of adding that, but it is not the module owner's responsibility to do it.
But I think you're right. We will probably have to deal with that problem too.
I'm just wondering if like again, maybe I'm beating a dead horse. Is it a horse you beat when it's dead?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I don't, but
but like maybe it's worth kind of having a clearer process for proposals, where the requirement is a little higher than what we currently have.
Sure.
I don't know.
Agreed. So that's perfectly fine. But would you agree that for now we could keep it?
No, I'm
okay.
perfectly fine with that.
Okay.
One other area that I think the module owners should be responsible for is sort of tracking the technical debt or like the work to be done within their area. Like for example, and this is sort of getting back to the bar that David was alluding to in the beginning. Sometimes in some of the providers or some of the applications, we kind of let in code that isn't quite ready or kind of where we want it to be, but it's a good starting point. We want others to be able to collaborate and work on it. And so a project owner, if they're going to let stuff like that into the modules that they own, would basically be responsible for recognizing that these are the applications or these are the components that have taken on some degree of technical debt, and then also sort of making sure that the people that originally put it there are going to be kind of working with them to get it better over time. But
be explicit about accepting the technical debt on. So whether it's to fix me comments or to do comments or things like that.
Well, that's actually it's an interesting point, because that means that like now the module owner can, by having kind of like a handle on that module, can feed that back into Jira as tasks of things that are missing, like tests and and improvements that are missing, and could be made semi-responsible for that, but responsible for that.
And that's precisely it. I mean, one of the responsibilities of the module owner is that the code that you let in, you have to be able to defend. And if you're working with the people to get it in, and you're willing to take on a little bit of debt now, that's fine. But there needs to be tracking, and there needs to be some degree of accountability, and that starts to become more of the responsibility of the module owner.
Yep, and to a degree we've been doing that, right? Because especially internally, when we know we're basically letting something in go with poor man's implementation, perfectly knowing well that we're going to address it. But usually we insist on there being some sort of a comment or at least indication that alludes to the fact that, hey, this is not ideal, this will still need some work.
And I like this process because it democratizes that. There shouldn't be things that we have access to just because they're internal.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we should definitely, whatever we think works well for us, we should try to socialize and sort of,
take what we know and pass it on. That goes back to the beginning.
So for this ownership, for ownership, I was just thinking, what's this ownership?
So ownership maybe is a bad term in that sense, because you really don't own it. Because they could be meaning that there could be three people who own it. If that's what you want, you own really what it is. You own the well, you own the authority, and you own the corresponding responsibility. Those two should come hand in hand to be able to exercise judgment over code that's coming into this area. That's it.
Yeah. Also, I was trying to ask the question is that so currently from the technical point of view, we have the highest top level is the TST teams, right? Or then is the owners, right? Owner for the modules and So probably you can add the one more page to define the relationships on your decision makings. Once the architectures or the owners or APIs or something conflict changes, basically the communities should have a rule and some things need to follow, and based on what, and make decisions. So current architectures now is we just define the underneath module as a project, but eventually that module, that owners means just own the workload. Yeah. So eventually they will hurt their the something. We should encourage the people and innovations and to under some umbrellas like TXT teams could define some abstractions or the guidelines or something. The ownership that has some sort of dependencies, or they can do the more work under that the infrastructure architecture. So I was thinking probably we can add more slides to talk about that part.
Sure. And that sort of feedback is welcome. And maybe a good next step is to put this in wiki format so it's easier for people to add to, those sorts of comments.
We can start drafting the requirements for becoming a owner, module owner. Document the nomination process, and then also potentially document the probation process, right? Just so that we have clear expectations and clear guidelines, so people know what to expect and what they're going to be held to.
Yeah, and those sorts of feedbacks and edits would be welcome. We'll get it into a better shape for you to edit. Yeah.
As one fun detail, I guess, that kind of comes out of it is that as you have more slightly more independence between different subsystems, the TST's role might also end up being kind of like this tiebreaker. And if there's two conflicting opinions about how a certain subsystem might be changed, TST has to say, okay, you do this, you stop doing that, and kind of just also be like a governance almost.
Yeah, and the thing is that I expect that the TST will continue to oversee the code going in. They just won't necessarily be the gating factor for the code going in. I still expect for us to do sort of audits, not necessarily from policing standpoint, but just so that we're familiar with what's going in, because otherwise we're going to lose touch.
So you're kind of just also making sure that everyone's a grown-up developer and
exactly, and so that there will be the audit process both for the benefit of the product owners being up to date with what the code base contains, at least at some level, at high level, and also potentially as auditing for sort of policing this submitters process. So for sure, and I would expect. I think we already sort of have the tiebreaker notion, right? I guess by default now, because they're allowing the code to go in there.
Any other thoughts or comments?
I think this is great.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks everybody for the feedback. So we'll put it in a better position for people to edit it and
so I think if we can put it on a wiki, and then we can start drafting those processes. And then, so I guess a next thing would be to try to figure out who we would like to nominate, and how many people, 3, I don't know, 4, I don't know, something like that, and just start running the pilot. And maybe what we would do is announce it to on an announce list or the dev list at least initially that this is happening, just in the interest of full transparency.
Right. Does anybody have any questions about how the nomination would work? I think when we document it, we'll provide some better examples. But for now, if you want to nominate, any questions on how to do that?
Yeah, kind of. But it's more like how the nomination process actually happens. And
yeah. So for right now, just from my viewpoint, it's going to be a little bit different in the sense that we're going to be looking just. In order to try out this overall process, we're going to look for ideal sort of just for what we would consider the easy examples, right? So just as an example here, let's say anything IPv6 related, right? That would be Charles, in my view. So that we could probably really easily find some code areas such as the protocol library that we have, and proxy ARP and things like that, where a lot of footprint, IPv6 has a lot of footprint, and let's say that Charles would be a reviewer for that code. And we have a one trial. Sort of, it's really, you can see it's not a module. It's a sort of a subject, I guess, owner really, and then so that would be in one example. Another example might be, for example, show. Right. Okay. And then just pick a few local owners that we could work with to iron out this process, and hopefully. But I think the nomination process that we're gonna do in the beginning will be slightly different, filtered at least, than the overall nomination process that we plan to have later. At least that was kind of my view. Is that fair? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, and we'll follow up with more information. I guess we'll circle up.
Yeah.
This week.
And we should probably send an email that points people to the wiki page, and then maybe provide some initial guidelines and maybe announcements of the initial module owners. Sounds good.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm gonna stop the broadcast.